We're here yet again for another Jumu'ah Mubarakah, where Allah Ta'ala allows us to gather, and Allah Ta'ala, His name manifests on His name Al-Jami' manifests on Yawm al-Jumu'ah. One of Dr. Umar Farooq Abdullah, may Allah preserve him, he said that the name Al-Jami' is also manifest in, the greatest manifestation of that name is in a tree, because of how all the branches are gathered into one trunk, and so that's the gathering, right? And as well as on the day of gathering, on Yawm al-Qiyamah, is also manifestation of Allah Ta'ala's name. The Prophet ﷺ said, مِنْ حُسْنِ الْإِسْلَامِ الْمَرْءِ تَرْكُهُ مَا لَا يَعْنِيهِ. From the beauty of a person's Islam is that he leaves off what has no meaning for him. In other words, in English we say, you mind your own business. That's actually an Islamic principle, is that you mind your own business. Things that have absolutely no relevance for us, we leave it alone, right? That's part of the husn al-Islam al-mar'. It's from the beauty of a person's religion, right? So it's from ihsan that a person does that, right? And it's a beautiful thing to do, to leave off things that have no meaning for us. And it also indicates that it's also a beautiful thing to busy ourselves with things that do have meaning for us. That also, we can understand that from that statement, is that we busy ourselves with things that have meaning for us. Allah Ta'ala says in the Qur'an that from His ayat, from His signs, are that He created the heavens and the earth. وَإِخْتِلَافُ أَلْسِنَتِكُمْ وَأَلْوَانِكُمْ, right? And from His signs are that the differences in your tongues, or in the languages that you speak, and the differences in your skin tones, right? So those are ayat of Allah Ta'ala, that the language that we speak and the skin tones that we have, the different tribes all over that are scattered all over the planet, these are all signs of Allah Ta'ala. When you look at all the languages, Allah Ta'ala chose the final revelation to be in the Arabic language, right? It's Qur'anan Arabiyan, right? Inna anzalnahu Qur'anan Arabiyan la'allakum ta'qilun. We revealed it as an Arabic Qur'an so that you may use your intellect. And so, in addition to that, and so what that causes is that it causes the Arabic language to be elevated above all other languages. Right? Is that because, the Qur'an also says, وَخِتَامُهُ مِسْكٍ, and the ending it's a seal of musk, right? Which is to elevate the ending. Well, if Allah Ta'ala is going to end with Arabic as the last revelation, that means it has some significance and some import. And in addition to that, our Prophet ﷺ, he's an Arab prophet, right? He was an Arab, right? And so these are all reasons that Arabic has been elevated amongst all other languages. During the caliphate of Sayyidina Umar, radiallahu anhu, Islam spread in several different directions out of the Arabian Peninsula, but one of the directions that it spread in was into the Western Asian countries and into Central Asia. And this had an amazing impact on the Central Asian countries, so much so that wherever Arabic went, it actually changed the languages that Arabic went into. It changed the cultures, and a lot of the languages that we speak in here, the grammars, the vocabularies, they've all been affected by Arabic. And so much so that the 6 men who preserved the sayings of our Prophet ﷺ in books referred to as the Sahih Sitta, the 6 sound collections of hadith, all of them are non-Arab. Those 6 men, right? So you could say that it's definitely that, this is from Allah Ta'ala's qadr, that this is how it worked out. This is what happened. This is what he did. And he also says in the Qur'an that, إِنَّا نَزَّلْنَا الذِّكْرَ وَإِنَّا لَهُ لَحَافِظُونَ. We sent it down and we're going to protect it, right? And it could refer to the Qur'an, it could also refer to this deen. This deen is protected. This deen, right, the orthodoxy of this deen, it's known, and if anybody wants to know what it is, they can figure it out. And if anybody doesn't want to be orthodox, they have the free will to do that as well. But this deen, and we can point our finger to those 6 men who devoted their lives to preserving the words of our Prophet ﷺ. And they were all non-Arab. And they learned this deen, and in addition to that, they mastered this language, because they wouldn't be able to preserve the words of the Prophet ﷺ had it not been for their understanding of Arabic. Had they not known what Arabic was, they wouldn't be able to preserve this deen. They wouldn't be able to collect the sayings of the Prophet ﷺ. And so what I want to do is I just want to go through a list of a few people. And they say that with the mentioning of Salihin, mercies befall upon us. And in light of that, and also in light of just these names that we've always heard over the years, and just to revisit these names and revisit these men who spent their lives, right, preserving this deen for us as a way of perhaps us also being somewhat of a means of preservation of this deen for the next generations as well. Because whether we recognize it or not, we all have a responsibility with this. When we become mothers and fathers, we are responsible for passing this deen down to our kids. And we get asked about that on Yawm al-Qiyamah. So each one of us, we bear responsibility of preserving the deen. And if it's not preserved in the homes and in the households, then if we still adhere to the idea, alhamdulillah, mashallah, my kids go to Sunday school. If it's not clear that that's not enough, that's not sufficient, then maybe in a few more years it'll be clear that it's not sufficient. So let's start off with the 6 scholars of hadith first. Imam al-Bukhari, right, the first one. His title is the city it's in Uzbekistan, right? Imam Bukhari. He was born there, and he's also buried in Uzbekistan, radiyallahu anhu. Imam Muslim was born in Nisharpur in Iran. Imam Abu Dawood, a Sijistani from Sijistan in Iran, modern day Iran. Imam al-Tirmidhi from Tirmiz in Uzbekistan. Imam al-Nasa'i from Nasa, which is also it's in Turkmenistan. Imam Ibn Majah, who is from Qazwin in Iran, modern day Iran. None of these countries or cities are in the Arabian Peninsula, or even close to the Arabian Peninsula. It's a several days journey to go to the Arabian Peninsula from these countries. And yet these are the 6 men that are responsible for preserving the words of our Prophet ﷺ. And the majority of our deen, we recognize that the first and primary source is the Qur'an. There's hadith warning about people who just say that at the end of time, don't let me find you just reclining on a pillow, just holding the Qur'an and saying, this is it, this is the deen. Because the Qur'an, only the Qur'an is not the deen. We recognize the hadith as a source of law in our deen. It's one of the sources of law, the second source of law. Right? The primary source is the Qur'an, the second source is the hadith. And these 6 men, they spent their lives preserving that for us. Right? Radiyallahu anhum. And not only that, that's just hadith, all right? That's just ilm hadith. What some of the most well-known Arab grammarians were of non-Arab descent. The Arab grammarians, they're of non-Arab descent. Imam Sibawayh was born in Shiraz in Iran. Right? Imam Sibawayh, one of our leading grammarians and linguists who, our linguists, they did amazing works. And You know, you get, when you have differences of opinion, that's usually due to because of the breadth of knowledge that a person has. When you have differences of opinion. We had two schools of grammar in Arabic. Two schools of grammar, because they differed amongst each other of what where language comes from. They had linguistic differences with each other. Schools of opinion don't arise from surface level knowledge. It arises from having deep knowledge in something. Right? It arises from having, that's why for madhabs, you have deep disagreements with people because they went deep into the knowledge, and there's 4 schools of law. And we have schools of grammar. We had people that disagreed on grammar. That's how deep they went. Whether the basis of language is a noun or a verb, that was the difference they had. So Sibawayh, Imam al-Taftazani was born in Taftazan, and then he's buried in Samarkand. One of our leading scholars of the rational sciences, of Aqidah and of Arabic. Mullah Ali al-Qari, from the border of Iran and Afghanistan, is buried in, he lived a lot of his life in the Arabian Peninsula. He wrote a very famous commentary on the Shama'il of Imam Tirmidhi, talking about the character of the Prophet ﷺ. And it's all in Arabic. Imam al-Nasafi, and let us not forget about Imam al-Ghazali, born in Iran and buried in Iran as well, right? Imam al-Ghazali. And he knew both languages. He knew Persian and Arabic. And his longest work is in Arabic, and the summary of that work is he wrote it in Persian. And it's available. People can actually, they have access to that. It's written in Persian. We have whole tafsirs written in Persian by some of our great scholars they didn't just write it in Persian because they were limited to it. They wrote it in Persian because they saw there was a need for that. But if they wanted to write it in Arabic, they could have as well. And then let us not forget about, Imam Abu Hanifa, who his father was not from the Arabian Peninsula. Right? Imam Abu Hanifa wasn't from Arab descent. And then also the great scholar Muhammad Zakaria Kandahlawi, who he's buried in Al-Baqi'. He died in 1982. He's buried in Medina, right outside the Masjid of the Prophet ﷺ. His first language was Urdu. He is the author of the books that we have, the Fada'il A'mal, Fada'il Zakat, Fada'il Al-Hajj. He's the author of those books. And he wrote a 15-volume commentary on Imam Malik's compendium of hadith. It's a commentary all in Arabic. So that's his, right? That's his contribution to the preservation of this deen. 15 volumes, right? So these are, right? These are, and we're not talking about Arabs here, right? We're not talking about Arabs. These are this is the non-Arab contribution to Islam. And then obviously now that Islam has come here to these shores here, we have people preserving this deen here as well in English too, right? Who also, they're fluent in Arabic, and they're also doing their own work in Arabic as well. So we learn a lot of things. Arabic is one of those things that has to be learned. The Qur'an is in Arabic. If you have always been attempting to understand the Qur'an through translation, you're only getting part of the message. You're not getting the whole thing. Because as anybody knows, translation is just only a translation. It's never going to be 100%. Right? It's never going to be 100%. You lose part of the meaning in translation. So, and then we have people who read Quran translation and they talk about Quran. This ayah says this. How could you do that? You didn't even get the whole full meaning, and then yet you're still talking about. How could you, right? Or about hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. There's a lot of intricacies in these things, and once you go into this, it doesn't end, right? It just doesn't end. It keeps going on and on. So Arabic is one of those things where but it has to be learned. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Al-mu'min al-qawi khayrun wa ahabbu ila Allah min al-mu'min al-da'if wa fi kullin khayr." احرص على ما ينفعك ولا تعجز. The strong believer is better and more beloved to Allah Ta'ala than the weak believer, but in both of them there's goodness. There's goodness in both of them. احرص على ما ينفعك. Be covetous over what's beneficial for you. Be covetous for what's beneficial for you, right? Where your benefit lies. And if understanding the book of God is not a beneficial thing, then, right? And then وَلَا تَعْجُزْ. And then don't deem yourselves incapable. How many times have you heard, oh, that's Arabic. You know, who has time to learn that? Shh, I'm busy. Right? Who's going to deal with Arabic? No, it's too hard. And then we have people who, you know, one of our teachers used to call them the Alif Ba Ta students, because every year they take Arabic class, it's just always the alphabet, just from Alif to Ya, Alif to Ya. That's all they did, because after they got to Ya, they said, well, I'm dropping. I can't deal with this stuff. وَلَا تَعْجُزْ. Don't deem yourselves incapable. That's not the way of the believer. When the believer comes up across an obstacle, it's tawakkaltu ala Allah, and then Bismillah, you go ahead, you strive forward. There's no such thing as, oh, it's too hard. What is that? Like, it's too hard? Really? I mean, the Prophet ﷺ never complained about anything being too hard. It's tawakkaltu ala Allah, and then you move forward and you do what needs to be done. And then when you're done, وَمَا تَوْفِيقِي إِلَّا بِاللَّهِ. My tawfiq it's only by God that I was able to do this. And that's what you ultimately see is that this is, you know, His tajalli of Mannan upon us, right? He's Al-Mannan. He's the bestower of favors, right? Alhamdulillah. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين يا قوم استغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم.